Alrighty, welcome back everyone to an AU patient summary call. We're going through ballot reconciliation still. Hopefully we finish at the end of October. We might not necessarily, and I'll talk about that in some of our updates. But what I did want to start with is an acknowledgement of country, and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today. And for me, that's the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And we acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. The agenda for today is usual business and updates. There's quite a few updates. Going through a little bit of the ballot update and then going into ballot reconciliation. And that's really what we're going to go through for the entirety of the meeting. I think if we get through everything that was advertised for discussion and voting today, we would either like to start discussing a couple of the more complex ballot items that we won't be able to vote today, but should really start to highlight and socialize those, or we can move to the AUPS composition walkthrough. So we'll have a checkpoint when we get through the 3 items that are scheduled for today to see where we want to go. And then we'll do a what's next. Is there anything else that people want to add into the agenda for today? All right, let's keep going then. So, usual business. We always start off with approval of minutes. They've been sent around for approval. Let me find the link. Here we go. I'll just run through those really quickly. Okay, so going through these, and I might make that a little bigger actually. There we go. Okay, so these were sent round for approval. We have our agenda, attendees, we have the slides, we have the recording, the transcript and chat log. We have the decisions that were made, including the minutes associated with this. As we go through, we can see that we voted on all, I think it was all 4 items that were brought to the last meeting. And then we also, I think, had a set of action items. Now, looking at those action items, which I haven't included here, so what we might do is do approval of minutes and then come back to these action items to check on the people who are tagged with that to see where this is. So before we look for a motion, does anyone need any more time to review these minutes? Hearing none, who would like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting? Attendees.
I'm okay to motion.
Thanks, Sanjeed. Who would like to second?
I'm happy to second that.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other questions or comments while I move to the electronic poll? Oops, hang on. Ignore that when it comes up. That's the wrong poll. Back. Okay, this is the right poll. Approval of minutes. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you only have access to the chat and you can see that, please vote +1, affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you've dialed in and you can't see either the electronic vote or the chat, you can say your name and whether you are affirmative, negative, or abstain. Still looking for a couple more people to vote. Just maybe one more. Okie dokie. So I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end the poll, and I just want to check there. David Weeby, is that a +1 for affirmative that you've popped in the chat?
Yeah, that's right. For some reason, I don't see any poll. That's the first time.
Oh, okay. So
That's
with
right.
what we have in the chat, and thank you, that is 9 affirmative, 0 negative, and 9 abstain. So the motion carries. We've approved the minutes. I'll go back to, actually, I should go back to the minutes because we need to go through the action items. Again. Okay, coming down to the bottom, we have 3 action items. That action, Heath, did you want to give an update on this one?
Yeah, pretty simple. I haven't done it and we'll do it.
Okay, sounds good. Next one doesn't have anyone who is actually associated with this, which is ensuring we've got an example of suppressed data included. I think maybe, Dushika, that should sit with you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that's fine. I will. Do you want me to add my name next to that action?
Yeah, if you could pop a comment to say that you'll pick up that action and then we'll track that through to the next meeting with you against that. Yep, that'd be great.
All right. Okay.
Okie dokie. And then there's an action on Tim to reach out to Mandy to set up a discussion around international identifiers. Is Tim on the line?
I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't, because he's in Adelaide at the moment with
Ah.
family.
Okay, so we'll hold that update for the action over to the next meeting. All right, back to other updates. Reminder about Connectathon dates. No, the Eventbrite tickets aren't out yet. We will make an announcement as soon as they are, but it is still confirmed to be Melbourne 9th and 10th. This is the HL7AU Connectathon. The next bit is that we have a poll open. Part of the ballot tickets is considering some of the requirements around the representation when a patient isn't currently taking any medications. Shelley, if you could pop a link to that poll in the chat. This is basically open till the end of today. And there's a poll open to provide some input into an understanding of how are systems recording this information. So I think it's actually got a really good description up here that I'll just read out because I think that's what's happening. That if there's a question that's been asked, are you taking any medications? And the patient says no, which we all know happens on a whole bunch of different forms, then how does your system record this? The moment there are 3 options recorded, it would be great if you were an implementer and you can vote on one of those 3. And if what actually happens is different to that, you can use this new option button to list that and vote there so that we can get a better picture on what is going on in the ecosystem when we are, I guess, when the system is capturing the result of that question. Heath, did you want to say any other words on that?
No, you summarized it very well.
Okay, great. So that's open. I think that's in the chat now. That's really only open to the end of today. It's been out for a while. So please respond if you are representing a system that deals with meds information. Next update is around base and core reconciliation. So the only one that's sort of relevant to us is that out of the recent AU-based AU Core TDG, it was voted in AU Core to move the body site and laterality guidance to base, and that's for consideration in base at its next meeting. It's not necessarily directly related to us, except that would, if any systems are looking to generate a patient summary that includes body site and laterality information on like conditions or procedures, that AU base would now be the source of that unified guidance for Australia. The next AU core agenda hasn't been announced yet, so I can't yet tell you whether or not what's going to be voted on in the next AU core TDG will actually impact AU patient summary. If it does, we'll make a notification in the Zulip channel for patient summary to advertise that people interested in patient summary should come along to the AU core TDG call and or comment on those issues that will be going up to vote. Also coming up will be addressing common issues. This also affects AU patient summary, but these are basically editorial. There's a couple of open issues on things like diagrams, and I think also the diagnostic result observation, which does also impact AU patient summary because what the issue that was raised really impacts base, which impacts core, which impacts patient summary. So that's going to be worked through the AU FHIR work group soon, and there'll be an announcement coming out, and the AU patient summary folks will be I guess, on that mailing list for when the meeting will come out and what those issues are. So if you are interested to have your say on those issues, you can attend. Next update is that out of some of the issues from AU patient summary, some of these have been referred back to IPS. I think about 4 have. And what we've done and what the IPS project team has done, which has been, you know, fantastic. They've scheduled a call to discuss our AU patient summary ballot referred issues. That's now scheduled for the 29th of October at 7 a.m. Well, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. By this point, daylight savings will have kicked in. So that's 8 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Times. The link to that is here. We'll have that in the minutes. The agenda is likely going to be at least this one, which is FHIR 2622, removing reference to IPS, which makes in AU patient summary a statement about the content in IPS. And the ballot issue was raised to remove that. And so this has been referred back to IPS project to clarify whether or not it is a representative statement or whether or not it needs to be clarified or needs to be removed.
So just for your information, that's going to be discussed on Wednesday next week from the IPS perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But it's potentially also going to be a candidate for that 29th as well.
Okay. Did you want to post that then in the Zulip, the chat, that this particular JIRA, like our AU patient summary Zulip, that it will be discussed at the next IPS call and provide the links to that so that if people are interested, they can come along?
The one related to 52622?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. It will be midnight.
Oh, yeah, that one's midnight. This one is going to be much more reasonable as 7 a.m. Australian or 8 a.m. Australian time. But at the moment, the IPS calls are at midnight, which is why we've requested, and they've been great at trying to organise that, a time that works better for Australia. So then it might not include that top one unless there's still, I guess,
think it will. It
will.
will. It's just more that it's going to be discussed this week, just so that we're sort of got it in our heads in preparation for that meeting.
Okay. And then we've got a few others that we've referred to IPS, and in fact referred to IPS by raising issues on IPS to clarify around no known X and no history of X. And I think that's possibly all that's on the agenda at the moment.
Yep.
Or the potential agenda. Yeah. So this has been scheduled. This is open. So with that date and time and that link, you can just come along to it. If you'd like a meeting invite, you can email or message me and I can forward you a meeting invite for that time so that it's in your calendar. I don't mind either way.
And just as a heads up, this is intended to be a monthly thing during our summer, their winter. Just so that we can have regular checkups at some reasonable time. And I can tell you that there is huge interest in what we're doing here in Australia. So although that we've got an agenda here that's very specific for our demands, at some point, I think they will be looking for us to share our experiences as well. So that's obviously not going to happen in November and probably not December, but sometime in the new year, probably.
Okay. Thanks, Heath. That comes to the end of the updates from me. Does anyone have any other updates that I've missed or any questions on the updates that I've provided?
Did you mention at all the publication of IPS?
No, has it been published?
No, but it's about to be, so it's imminent. It'll be, if it's not, well, it'll be.
I kind of, yes.
Will
okay,
be in
no, to be
October.
fair.
It's been approved by the technical steering committee, so it's been approved. It's now just into final publication processes, basically back to HQ HL7. So this month, it will be officially published.
Yeah, I think admittedly I took that off the updates because we've been saying that for a while. And I thought I would just put it back on the updates when it's happened. But no, okay, that's great. If it's this month, then I hope our next meeting I can announce that it's published. Oh, any other updates or news from people? All right. So I want to draw your attention to this. Daylight savings kicks in imminently, kicks in as of Monday. We need to look at our times. There is a poll open. It's been emailed round to all the attendees. This poll will be open until the end of this call, and we will announce what our time will be during daylight savings, whether that's the same time for you or a different time, depending on which state you're in. Shelley, can you pop that in the chat?
Yep.
Fantastic. So that's in there now. So this remains open for the next, I guess, 50 minutes. And then based on the majority vote, that will be the time going forwards. And until I think it's like early April is when daylight savings ends, where we'll have another poll to see where we will keep going. Other reminders. The Sparked CDG TDG Day in Canberra is closing rapidly. About 60% or more of the tickets have been sold. So if this is something that you can attend, whether you were there for AU Patient Summary, whether or not you were there to submit your pitch for what we should be working on in AU Core R3, because we've finished work on R2, then come along to that meeting. There's a QR code on the bottom right. Which brings me to the next update. Backlog community pitch. We've got several already. This is also a way to get certain content into Patient Summary, where we are left with IPS profiles, and we don't have an Australian Patient Summary profile because there's no underlying definition and agreement on how that works within Australia, which has to really go through AU Core. So if you have a set of things you want to work on, and whether or not you want to work on those from the perspective of things like adding capabilities around searching or updating, or things around provenance information, or whether or not you want to add in new capabilities, perhaps that's something around the social determinants of health, additional vital signs, other kinds of observations, spaces we've not yet moved into around doing diagnostic reports, then this backlog pitch is the opportunity to present to the community what and why this is relevant, and why it's relevant now, and that we should be doing that work in the next release. So we've got all the links there, and there's also the link in the chat to how you can put together your EOI and submit that and be one of the people who will be presenting to the combined CDG-TDG in Canberra on what we should be working on for AU Core Release 3.
What's the deadline for that?
20th of October.
Thank you.
Alrighty, quick ballot update before we actually then get into ballot reconciliation. So I'm going to move past this slide because we see it every time. This doesn't change. We are in ballot reconciliation. Here's our percentages now. What we were, we were actually, this is quite changed over the last fortnight. So the AU Core TDG co-chairs are over 50% of the way through triaging. The goal is to actually have this 100% done by our next meeting. However, given that some of our issues have been referred to IPS, and that meeting will really only happen at the end of October, it's actually quite likely that at least one, if not 3 or 4 issues, actually need to rely on the advice from IPS, which will only come at the end of October. So the triage will go as fast and as far as it can here, and otherwise we will work with the IPS project team to see if we can at least land on an international position at the end of October, so that we can then go straight into the next meeting with that guidance to make a determination on what we do with that. In terms of reconciliation, of the 21 issues that have been triaged, 13 have been voted on, 3 are here today. There's a bunch more, and I'll talk about that in a sec. And in terms of changes in the actual IG itself, 6 of those have already been applied, so they're already present in the CI build of AU Patient Summary. So here's where we are meeting-wise for ballot reconciliation. And also, this isn't where we're going to stop, because there's ballot reconciliation, which covers all the ballot items. But continuing on through November, there are a number of other issues raised, and even things raised like last week around suggestions for enhancement, suggestions for changes to AU Patient Summary that we will continue to work through. Our goal is to finish the ballot reconciliation as soon as possible, and then to move on to the other requests provided from the community on feedback and bring them through this group. So there will continue to be, I guess, meetings where we work through change requests, at least 3 or 4 after this set. So coming back to our schedule for completing the feedback that has been voted on in ballot, we've already done 1 and we got through those 4 issues. Today, we've got 3 that we're going to go through. There will also be an electronic vote released pretty soon that will look at the results in our next meeting, along with a number of other items. The electronic vote is going to be around like editorial and informative kind of content. And there will be an email with instructions put out there on how do you participate in the electronic vote and what are your options. Move past that. Okay. Before we actually get to the real ballot reconciliation, I just wanted to remind people of dispositions. So for all the items that come to us to consider, we can make one of these determinations. We can say that what's been provided is something that we don't think we're going to complete in this release. It doesn't mean it's not relevant, doesn't mean we won't work on it in the future. And in fact, we acknowledge that this is actually applicable to Patient Summary, but it's just not something we're actually going to complete in R1. We would mark that as consider for future use. We can then also mark things as persuasive. Persuasive, just as persuasive, carries two things. We agree with the argument and we agree with the change proposed. Persuasive with mod is where we agree with the argument, and to a certain degree, we agree with the change proposed, but we are going to make other changes. Sometimes that's because someone has raised one issue in one section, and the change actually needs to go across like 5 or 6 sections. So that would be persuasive with mod, where we say we agree with this, but we are going to make a change to all these other parts of the IG. That's just an example of persuasive with mod. Not persuasive is sort of similar in that it has two parts. We don't agree with the argument and we don't agree with the change. Not persuasive with mod is we don't agree with the argument. We're going to make a change. This is almost always that we're not going to make the change proposed. Often it is because the issue that was raised has highlighted a gap in clarification or guidance in the specification. So we don't actually think that what the person who had voted on was correct. But we can understand that there should be an improvement into the wording in the specification to make it clear why that's not appropriate and what people should do instead. So that's not persuasive with modification. That's what we're going to need to be voting on. Well, now. I'm going to hand that over to, is that you, Landon, who's taking on the first couple of issues?
It's me for the first two, so I can share.
All right, I will stop sharing.
Oh. And share. Just confirming you can see my screen.
Yep.
Perfect. I'm talking through these first two items today, these ballot items. I'll start with this one here. So this one was raised by Tim from the agency. I think both the tickets I'm talking through were raised by Tim. And this slide raises a clarification request around the encounter in the AU patient summary bundle. So for this, I've summarized the description so it's more slide friendly. So I'll paraphrase what this ballot description is about. So in the description of the ballot item, it was in the AUPS, the bundle allows 0 to many encounters. However, it isn't immediately clear how this is intended to be used. The question raised whether this slice is meant to contain a list of all encounters, which would make the patient summary excessively large, or represent only the encounter that the patient summary, or for that patient summary. Does it represent the encounter for that patient summary? So I've included images below just for reference with the AU PS bundle, so you can see how it's represented here with the slices for reference. And this shows how the bundle entry size is represented. And note here that the resource encounter type is AUPS encounter. So what I've done, I do have the disposition on this slide here, but for convenience, I've sort of just broken down the key points so it's a bit easier for me to talk to. But it is fundamentally the disposition. So the co-chairs for this one have landed on a disposition of not persuasive. So the key points from this are the bundle is a container. It doesn't specify what must be included. No encounter history is required. The AUPS doesn't ask for a list of past encounters. Why 0 to many? Because some AUS profiles, for example, the procedure marks encounter as must support. So encounters may appear in the bundle from multiple reference profiles. For inclusion, only resources referenced by the composition shall be in the bundle. And it's a producer choice. So if an encounter is only referenced via another resource, like medication request encounter, you may include it or choose to omit it. And it's fundamentally a choice of the producer. And if included, it must conform to the relevant AUPS profile. So that's fundamentally the disposition, which is pretty much summarized here in this slide. And from my understanding too, we're talking to Heath, like with the regards to the slice. Actually, that's probably not relevant. That's probably relevant to the next slide. So what I might do now is I might throw out some questions. Heath, you have your hand raised.
Can you just go back a slide?
Yep.
I just want to clarify something. It's probably just a wording issue here, but the way that I read that, only resources referenced by the composition must be in the bundle. That's kind of not quite right. The resources
not
referenced
only, yeah.
The resources referenced by the composition are the ones that you shall provide in the bundle. Any others are optional. So, for example, an encounter reference from a composition shall be in the bundle, but an encounter that is referenced by a condition that's in reference from the composition does not need to be, but can be in the bundle.
Thanks,
So
Heath.
the only
Drawing
there
back-
is not right.
I think the only encounters you're allowed to include have to be navigable from the composition. So you can't just throw in the whole history unless somehow you've made it navigable from the composition.
Now, going back to when we were starting our bundle and composition walkthrough, we did spend a little bit of time looking at the rules in FHIR documents. So the source of this rule, I just thought for clarity, is actually coming from the FHIR standard, which provides a set of requirements of how FHIR documents shall behave. And an AU patient summary is a FHIR document, and that is where that rule is coming from.
The summary is pretty much from the sentence here. I think I missed the as and the shall. So as only resources directly referenced by a composition shall be in the bundle.
I think it's still understandable. I mean, you could turn that into a comma, I suppose, because the beginning is a predicate, but sure.
What we're trying to say is that the ones that are shall are the ones that are directly referenced. That's what we're trying to say. The others are optional. Unfortunately, our English is not quite as clear. And I'm still not sure I'm clear.
Oh, thanks, Heath. Thanks for the clarification. That made sense. I'll throw out to any other. Does anyone else have any feedback or any queries around this one with regards to this disposition on the issue?
Could you go to the bundle, because I think this is, while this is raised on a specific item, I think this is quite relevant to go to the AUPS bundle. And how encounter works is how the majority of resources work, actually, for their inclusions in the bundle. That for me is tiny. I don't know about other people, but I could use that thingy zoomed in.
You got a very wide screen, mate.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay. Awesome. So quickly, just so that people can make an informed decision on this. Every resource type that is the target of either a must support element, or actually, let's say there are two things that get included in entries. Each entry is a resource type. So like composition, patient, allergy intolerance, they're in alphabetical order of all the resources considered relevant to an AU patient summary document. There are two preconditions to getting into this list. One is that the resource type is the target of a must support element, as in if composition.subject has patient, then patient is in there. Or if procedure.encounter is of resource type encounter, then it's in this list. Essentially, it's saying these are the possible things that we recognize could make up the bundle. Obviously, the cardinality provides some rules around what has to, which only sits with composition and patient. Everything else is optional. The other precondition for getting into the bundle is that in the composition, there is a section entry that identifies this as being a possible inclusion. So if we go down, I think there's like, is there clinical impression in this list? Which if not, we might have made a mistake because it's in IPS. Oh, there it is. Oh, so alphabetization failed. Hang on. Oh, I think that got fixed later on. There's a technical correction that turned this into an alphabetical list. So clinical impression is in this list, not because any must support element has this as its target. It's in that list because one of the recognized sections of an IPS document says that you could fill this with a clinical impression resource. So those are the two reasons that entries get listed. And everything but composition and patient are 0 to many, as in if you've decided this is part of your document, put it in the bundle. And if not, that's okay, don't. Did that help? Or did I just confuse the waters?
It's somewhat peripheral to this, but I mean, generally around patient summary, it's necessary to know.
I think what I was trying to call out is that Encounter is no different than any of the other resources like clinical impression or anything else. The reason it's in the list is it's recognized as a potential inclusion in the patient summary document, whose criteria for potential inclusion is quite wide ranging, and it's up to the producer. And so all this says is we've recognized that this is a possible entry that you've decided can be included.
I've just put in the chat a little bit out of the document specification, the specification for FHIR document, which basically sets limits to how much you can include. And so I think that description of the document specification should satisfy Tim's concern that people will feel able to throw in large amounts of stuff. I suspect that Tim's comment came from looking at the bundle constraints without keeping in mind the requirements to be the document requirements as opposed to just the bundle requirements.
So if we go back to the disposition then, which I think we've provided some background on why this is the proposed disposition, then let's talk about that further. But first, Sanjeev, your hand is up.
Yeah, Daniel, just a request, maybe it's just me. Is it possible to have these conversations with some kind of example? Because question being, how do we validate this at Connectathon then?
Oh, we already have.
No, I mean, Inferno will check our profile or the payload alignment with the profile, but how do we validate data elements?
Yeah, no, I'm lost. I think it's actually working. I'm pretty sure that the way that we've set this up is if you include, hang on, just to check, if you include an encounter or a clinical impression, you need to meet the requirements set out. What is, I guess, being called out here is you're not mandated to include an encounter. It's up to the producer to determine that that is a part of the bundle, the part of the document that needs to be shared as part of the bundle. But if you do, then it gets checked and validated.
So that sits with the producer effectively. I mean, it's not under the purview of the Inferno tool, right? Yeah. So
correct. That's right. It's up to the producer, with the exception of composition and patient resource, which is why those are mandatory. That because there's so many different mapping situations that there's no black and white test to know whether or not the source system should have included this in the first place.
And just to be note that there's a lot of work going on in the validator to improve the validation of IPSs and AUPSs. So it may not be picking up all of these nuances, but it's probably going to get there at some point.
It's pretty close, yeah.
It's a lot better than it was, say, 6 months ago.
The other thing
I think
is to remember is that simply not throwing errors in the validator doesn't guarantee that you're valid, because there are some things that can be invalid which are in principle not findable by the validator.
Yeah, and mass support's one of those.
so. Sanjeev, could you pop the specifics of what you'd like tested, maybe either in an email or in the chat or in Zulip, and we can see if that's something that we could confirm whether or not we can craft a test about that, or like which parts we can.
Yeah, I think Richard hit the nail on the head. I mean, these must support elements, I know responsibility sits with the producer, but is there any way of adding anything else to Inferno to at least get a guidance or
We should, okay, as we get closer to the connectathon, we can actually schedule this as a topic, because I think there's a level that we can do. For example, some of the AU core tests test whether or not you've provided an instance of every must support element. In patient summary, we would need to look at gradings because of how patient summary treats like required, recommended, and optional sections. But we could look at, if that's useful, trying to craft test suites that test kind of different configurations of must support elements.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think we need to discuss it, but I think that's what we should do. If that's something of interest, then we should add that into our preparation, kind of trying to come into the December connectathon and see how far we can get and test that out. And if it is useful, sort of continue that line of thought. Which, remembering that I'm chair and I need to actually bring the meeting to a close, having gone through all our agenda items, back to this topic. Looking at this particular disposition, are there any other comments or questions on the proposed disposition?
Note the original query was primarily around, is the list of all encounters in the bundle? That was the original query, and does it only represent the encounter that was generated by the patient summary? So this is a response to that. This is why this disposition is non-persuasive. So is there any further questions around this one before we put forward a motion?
I'm not hearing any. If there are no further comments or questions, and no one would like to suggest an, oh, Sanjeev.
So just if I were to summarize in my own words, suppose during I suppose there's a shared care plan, and one of the encounters in that shared care plan as patient summary is generated. The point here we are making is only that encounter should be referenced.
The point we're making is if you have referenced that encounter from the composition, you have to include it. If the encounter that references a care plan is off something else, like a procedure or a medication request, that's up to you. The care plan, if it's directly referenced from the composition, like there's a section that includes care plans, you have to include it. If it's referenced off something else, that's up to you. So that's the hard rule. Heath?
I'm just trying to see if I can assist in explaining what I think this is trying to say. If that's all right, can I do that?
Sure.
So the question was about the fact that there was a list of encounters in the bundle, whether that meant that that was going to be able to provide a list of previous events as represented as encounters in a patient summary. And we are saying, no, that does not mean that. What it is actually the composition that indicates what information goes into a patient summary. And there are no sections in the patient summary that says, here is a list of encounters of previous events. There is only one encounter that is actually directly referenced from the composition, and that is the encounter that is where the patient summary was actually, that is related to this patient summary or relevant to this patient summary, where the patient summary was produced. And the fact that the bundle has this list is just a bag of places for any of the encounters that are collected as part of directly related to the patient or indirectly related, sorry, directly related to the composition or indirectly related through other resources. That's where they go in that bundle. So it's literally just a collection of encounters that have been referenced somewhere in the graph of resources that are included in the composition or referenced in the composition.
All right, how are we doing, people, with understanding this? I think we've had 3 or 4 different people talk about that a bundle is a bucket. It contains some stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's 2 kinds of things it could contain. The things you have to make it contain, which is if it's directly off the composition. An encounter is not required in AU Patient Summary or IPS. And then there's the other things that you can also add in that you've decided make this up, and that's up to you if you include them, with no semantics on the fact that they're in a bundle mean anything. All the semantics come off the composition. I think trying to really summarize that in plain language. Are there any other comments or questions? And if people would like to go through any other walkthroughs on this topic. Okay, hopefully we feel confident voting on this. Not hearing any further comments or questions, I'm happy to entertain a motion.
I'll be happy to entertain a motion as per the disposition on the screen.
So you're motioning not
persuasive?
persuasive?
Yes,
as per
not
the
persuasive.
disposition on the screen. Okay, thank you, Landon. Who would like to second?
I'm happy to do so.
Okay, Heath is happy to second. Any other comments or questions before we vote for what is on the screen? Okay, I'm going to launch that poll. Okay, you should see in front of you affirmative, which is non-persuasive that the inclusion of encounter in a bundle requires a historical list of encounters. Negative and then abstain. The same as before. If you only have access to the chat, you can put your vote in the chat. And if you have neither access to the electronic vote or the chat, you can say your name and whether you are affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay, looking at the chat and the vote, I still need a couple more people to vote, please. Okie dokie. I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll and share the results. Including what's in the chat, we have 15 affirmative, 0 negative, and 6 abstain. So the motion carries. This is non-persuasive. And we can move on to the next item.
Great, thank you. Okay, cool. So this is the next item that I'll talk through. So again, I have summarized the description here from the main ticket. So I'll describe what it is. So this item raised a question about why the AUPS composition encounter element references encounter rather than constraining it to the AUPS encounter profile, and why medication requests and procedure reference AUPS encounter profile. So I've included the examples here, and what we can note here is the primary difference is that both of the medication requests and procedure both have must support obligations and composition does not. I'll go to slide 2. There was a discussion and a chat around this particular ticket, and I'll just walk through the summary of that chat. So the summary was, we only constrain must support elements to AUPS profiles. There are the same patterns used in IPS and AU Core. Medication requests and procedure use AUPS encounter. They inherit a must support encounter from AU Core, so they contain AUPS encounter. Composition encounter isn't must support, so it's not constrained to AUPS encounter. But I learned this from Heath, that there is like a bit of a safeguard that the slice actually does constrain a profile down to AUPS encounter profile, which will, I think, force you down to use the AUPS encounter profile in usage. Therefore, the composition encounter implicitly must be an AUPS encounter anyway. And the other, I think the last thing noted in the chat was that profile below, that if we constrained every non-must support reference, we may explode the rule set. So I'll go to the disposition and just do a bit of a summary on where the co-chairs reach a disposition for this one. So I'll talk to the key points. So as a rule of thumb, we only constrain must support elements to AUPS profiles. So medication requests and procedure encounter, these are must support, so they are to use AUPS encounter. Composition encounter is not must support, so it stays reference encounter, thus unconstrained. And it was noted that the bundle is a container. Encounters, when included, provide the context to the resources that reference them, not the bundle itself. And there is a design principle where an AUPS profile exists. We replace the IPS AU Core references with the AUPS profile references where available. That is a summary of the description, the comments, and the disposition put forth by the co-chairs. I'd like to open this up to any questions or discussion points. Does this make sense to people?
I think it makes sense.
Thank you, David.
I'm not hearing any other comments or questions. That suggests to me that we can move
I have a
immediately
question.
to a motion. Sorry,
Might-
Neil, go for it.
Might be unrelated to the, I mean, in terms of the disposition, I agree, but like, is the having encounters which are not AUPS, is that also allowing for, say, that the patient being overseas and having a consult there, or that's totally unrelated to this?
It's a good question. It's probably not a completely true statement, in that if an encounter is included in the bundle directly, it has to conform to AUPS. And you don't, as we just talked through in the previous issue, you can make a reference off to something external. You don't, but you could write a display. You're not forced to actually incorporate any referenced encounter as a resource in the bundle. But for anything that you do, and you're claiming this is an AU patient summary document, it does need to conform to the AU patient summary profile. Now, the AU patient summary profile, it's actually quite expansive. Any well-formed international encounter would pass it. There's a whole bunch of just SNOMED international concepts, a whole bunch of HL7 international concepts, and there's a couple of things that are mandatory, but it's not an AU patient summary profile in the sense that it makes sure that the encounter happened within Australia. It's just got some, I guess, quality guidelines on it.
Okay. Thank
If
you.
it doesn't work, and that would be good to know, and we can test that through connectathons, that might let us know that there is a need to be exchanging some meaningful encounter information that this is too restrictive for. We haven't run into that yet, but that's the kind of feedback we need to know before, I guess, we bake in these profiles.
I guess from an international point of view, I guess I would have anticipated that it would be very easy to map, at least if you recognize you were going to start receiving encounter data from overseas.
Oh, legit, I think it can just be one-to-one. So far, assuming you're a well-formed international encounter, like you've used your SNOMED concepts, or even if you haven't, because some of our stuff is just preferred, it'll validate. So it's more around having a minimum of data quality information around encounters, and less about it being really Australian. Heath?
Yeah, I'm just doing a scan of the encounter resource, the AUPS profile at the moment. There's nothing there that's looking too scary, except for the things it references, because as an example, the encounter has a subject that has to be an AUPS patient. It has a service provider that has to be an AUPS organization. So, you know, it's just that web
Now,
of
hang on.
references.
Hang on.
So
Let me come back to
again,
that.
as soon as you stop internalizing your references, as in referencing within the bundle, then a lot of that becomes less of a problem. As you were
I'm
just
going to say patient should never be viewed as a problem, because the entire point of AU patient summary, which is already called out in the bundle, you get one and only one patient. I hope all the resources in the bundle reference that patient. That's what they're meant to do.
yeah.
So I don't think that is scary. That's just
Well,
how it needs to work.
I guess the use case that was articulated, that this is an encounter from overseas.
But if you're saying that this is an encounter overseas for my patient, I've included my patient in that bundle, then you're just referencing back to, you know, the my patient that's already in my bundle. You don't need to do any more work there. If it's some other patient, that's a problem. That's not patient summary anymore.
Yeah.
Richard?
I think one of the things is this an encounter overseas could have a few aspects that make it one overseas. One is it might be the encounters overseas. Another one is the encounter resource might be constructed in an overseas system. But the thing being, in the Australian, in a document which conforms to the Australian IPS, it doesn't have to include that same resource, that same encounter instance. What it wants is an encounter resource, which is a faithful description of the content in that external encounter resource, which is being done in a way which conforms to the Australian IPS. So I think the supposed problem comes from saying, I want to be able to just grab that IPS, that resource from anywhere and include it in here. And as a case of, well, no, we can't guarantee that. What we can say is the information that's in there can be represented in an Australian appropriate manner in this way. And that sort of stuff is quite doable. It's just that it might be, you may need to do some translation. Hopefully you won't, but you won't be locked out. It's just that you won't be able to simply grab it without inspecting it and seeing that it does conform. And if it doesn't conform, then you've got to do just a translation process.
So I actually think there's a fair chance that it just will. And I would be very interested for systems that have this as one of their use cases to test this at the community farm. Because the rules we're largely putting in things around encounter are saying that we have enough information around encounters. Not that it's really Australian information. I know some of our value sets are SNOMED CTAU. A lot of that's preferred. It's not required. It's not extensible. A lot of it is preferred. And that would just map straight on to whatever is happening in international. So I would be really interested to know where, if any, we are preventing the meaningful sharing of quality encounter information. Because we're not trying to prevent that with an AUPS encounter profile. I think we all understand that we might get international content coming through, and it's only where we have some really good reasons that we're looking to, I guess, restrict that. But that's pretty rare. I took the AUPS to the Madrid Connectathon, and 3 other countries could validate against it. That was Canada, it was US, and there was somewhere from Europe. So I think we're on the right track, but I would be very interested to just keep reconfirming that.
And by the way, this is a topic that we're going to discuss in Canberra in November.
That sounds great. And it is, that's right. This is the IPS, the limitations of receiving an IPS or international content that doesn't conform to the national standard.
So it'd be great to have some practical experience if people can do so. Otherwise I'll be bringing theoretical.
So back to this particular issue. And I think that was timely, and thank you, Neil, for raising that, because I do think it's something that we need to be careful of as we go forwards, that we aren't unintentionally restricting the meaningful kind of information that can come from international sources. While we've not particularly addressed that in this disposition, I'll bring it back to what's on the screen, Landon. Are there any other comments or questions that people want to raise on this topic before we move to a vote? I'm not hearing any. So, Landon, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to put this disposition as not persuasive for the item on the screen.
Thank you, Landon. Would anyone like to second?
I'm happy to second that. David.
Okay, was that you, David? Okay, yep.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions while I move to the vote? Okay, I'm watching that now. So you should see the vote in front of you. And again, as before, if you need to use the chat, use the chat. And if you can't access either, say your name and whether it's affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay. We need quite a lot of people to vote, actually. Lots of people are on the fence. Only half have voted. 70% voted. Still need a few more. If you have any questions or comments, you can ask them now, even while the vote is in motion. Okay, I'm going to cut that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll and share the results. With the votes in the chat, we have 14 affirmative, 0 negative, 3 abstain. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, you'll stop sharing. So I think the next item, which was raised by Dushika, are you happy to share your screen on that item?
Yes, I will share my screen now. Okay, you should be able to see it now. Can someone please confirm that you can see the
It's not in
5?
presentation mode, but yeah, we can.
Okay. Is it
It
all
doesn't
right?
have to be.
Okay,
Yeah,
all
go
right.
for it.
All right. Okay. So this is about a number of clinical profiles in AU Patient Summary, and these are the profiles like allergy intolerance and conditions and AUPS smoking status. There are core elements in these profiles that define what resources represent and who it is about. So these are the elements like resource subject.code, for example, allergy intolerance code or immunization vaccine code, and also resource.patient or resource.subject, like allergy intolerance patient or condition subject. These are all mandatory and they're flagged as must support. And currently the AUPS producer obligation is shall populate if known, which means that a producer only has to populate these elements if the value is known and allowed to be shared. And the issue that's been raised is that this doesn't confirm the producer is actually capable of populating these elements at all. It only sets the rules for behavior when the data is available. So the proposal is to change the obligation for producers to shall populate. And that way producers are required to have to demonstrate the capability to populate this element and also to actually populate it when a value is known and allowed to be shared. So alternatively, we could keep shall populate if known and add a second obligation of shall able to populate, which together effectively makes shall populate. So I'll go to the next screen. And I actually have two screenshots on this screen. So in orange, I've highlighted the core elements that we are talking about. So it's code and patient or the subject. In the case of conditions, so it's clear what elements we actually mean. In a different color, in yellow, I've actually highlighted patient.reference and subject.reference, which is the actual reference to the resource. That's also mandatory. And during discussion on this ticket, there was a comment that suggested that we also specify shall populate on patient.reference or subject.reference, so that this rule is consistent all the way down the mandatory reference path. So that's something that we could consider during the disposition. I'll go to the next slide. So this ticket's actually been triaged by AU Patient Summary co-chairs, and it's been disposed as persuasive to agree that add shall populate obligation for AUPS producers on the elements of resource.code and resource.patient or resource.subject as they are mandatory and must support. And this actually states that producers are both able to populate these elements and populate them when value is known and can be shareable. It can be shared. So populate-if known only tells the system to fill the element when the value is known. It doesn't show that the system is capable of doing so. So we could add able to populate to add this capability, but using shall populate says both in one and it's clear. So given the previous slide and the screenshot discussion, we could possibly extend this disposition to explicitly include patient.reference, subject.reference, or shall populate, so that all mandatory references are covered consistently. And I think at this stage, I'll just stop and open up for any comments or questions, possibly around populating obligations on patient.reference. Richard?
Please explain how I conform to a system which has said that shall populate if I know that there isn't a value, so I don't have a value to supply. How in that case do I comply with shall populate? I believe we do. I just think it needs more clarity. Yeah, I just think it needs more clarification how, because it says shall populate, but there isn't a value. So how does that meet my obligation?
That's why it says that systems are capable, usually during conformance testing, of proving that under certain circumstances, And the certain circumstances is that you have the value. You can prove that your system has the capability to do so if you have the value. So if the system under conformance testing could prove that one of its resources has the value and didn't have a data absent reason, that would form evidence. I mean, noting I'm not controlling whatever conformance scheme might actually do the conformance testing and might outline what those requirements are. But I guess that's the difference between stating shall populate if known, which doesn't even require that your system is even capable of knowing this. And shall populate is your system is capable of knowing it. And often you're required to prove that in conformance testing. And that therefore, when you know it, and only when you know it, do you provide it.
Yep.
Especially,
Thank you.
especially if you're happy.
Thank you. I think one of the things here is that the name of the name of the obligation is not capture all of the subtleties of the obligation.
I totally agree. I'm actually in favor of including both of them. I know Heath and I differ on this point. Heath has a preference because it's
I'm coming around.
good to just have shall populate, but I have the number of conversations I have had with people around being basically confused about that. But if we list two things of able to and populate if known, that seems to be much more understandable when people read it.
Yeah, and that's why I'm coming around to that. I mean, I think I'm thinking from a technical perspective and less verbosity, but if it's clearer to people, effectively the meaning is the same. So as long as the meaning is articulated better, that's critical to me.
Yeah, it seems like the code shall populate is a code that is not self-explanatory.
That's much scarier sounding.
The thing, we're not putting this everywhere though, Richard. So the thing with populate is that you need to be able to, but you don't have to unless if you are not allowed to share, and hence we put our DAR codes on it. Okay, so that's how you satisfy the obligation is through DAR. But the subtlety of this is, okay, if you're not allowed to share, then you can put your DAR, but you've got to also prove me that there's some cases where you do actually not provide a DAR. And DAR as in data absent reason. Does that help as well?
I think DARs here wind up being a distraction because
you're probably right, but that's technically what the obligation allows.
Yeah. But the thing is, this can apply to optional elements. So if I've got an optional element and I don't have a value, then I'm not actually obligated to give you an explanation for why I'm not supplying a value. I can simply not supply the value.
Yep.
And the implication is I haven't got the data. And so,
clarify that for the purposes of this particular JIRA, all the targets that would change are mandatory. All are 1.1 and must support.
Yeah, and that's the critical thing here. And not only are they mandatory, but they're absolutely essential for having any kind of value to the recipient. Without a subject, it's useless. Without a code of what allergy it is or what immunization, it is useless. So we're not doing this like everywhere. We're only putting it on very small number of elements where they are mandatory, and they're absolutely essential. If we put a DAR on this, it's not of any value. So even though theoretically we could put a DAR, it doesn't make sense to do so.
Okay. Are there any would you like to comment back on that, Richard, or are there any other comments or questions?
No, I'm fine with that. No more comments or questions.
Can I just point out one thing that I forgot to include in the slide pack? I'll just go to the JIRA and it has a list of resources that this applies to. So it applies to allergy intolerance, condition, immunization, medication request and statement, procedure, smoking status, and pathology result observation. And the elements in question are code and patient or the subject, depending on the resource type, which are all mandatory and must support.
So in summary, there could still be some mandatory elements that are still only populate if known. Is that right, Dushi?
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Right. So
And
it's
there
not a
would be-
blanket everywhere. It's only these two, which we've kind of said, these are really key.
For example, I think both medication statement and medication request have some mandated, as does smoking status, around effective date times, or at least effective X. And the proposed ticket does not incorporate that. The proposed ticket is resource code and a reference or the subject or patient.
So authored on there, I think, is mandatory. So we're not putting it on there. That's still going to be populate if known. So you can put a DAR on there all the time because your system doesn't know it.
So coming back to this, we have two questions that were proposed in here. I think which might be on your next slide, Dushi, just for us to work through. Or maybe it's this slide.
I haven't actually got the next slide. Yeah, sorry.
Well, there's one of them, maybe go back, that poses a question. That one poses a question. If resource.subject incorporates this, what about subject.reference, which is also mandatory and a part of that? Is that something for us to work through now?
Can we get through one first?
Well, it would need to be an addendum, an amendment to the proposed disposition.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a separate JIRA. So if it's going to be voted on, it gets voted on now.
So what's the disposition? Does the disposition include this? No.
No. So that would need to be a friendly amendment to be considered to incorporate resource.patient.reference, type delimiter, resource.subject.reference.
So it was me that raised the question as part of reviewing this. And I was looking at the main element and then thought, well, the sub-element is also mandatory. And without that sub-element, it's kind of mute. But if it's, I guess, if it's hard enough for people to understand the first one, then maybe we can just deal with that later in another iteration.
Can we take a note then that we will leave that out of this discussion and that you can raise that as a separate JIRA for further consideration based on the outcome of this vote? Okay. Then the other thing that needs to be determined is, which I think is relevant to the conversation, is what will be proposed shall populate, or is what will be proposed adding a second obligation of shall populate if known? Noting they come to the same normative outcome, but there has been a discussion about what is more understandable and readable.
You mean able to populate?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Able to populate. You're right. Is there a preference? And I'd just like to ask people to speak up now because I will have to call for a vote in the next minute. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. Would someone like to make a motion? Noting that please clarify if you're going for shall populate or to add a shall able to populate.
I will make a motion then that we accept this ticket as persuasive and to straighten populate-if-known to populate. So we change it to shall populate.
Thanks,
Instead of
Tushi. Who would like to second?
So I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Heath. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I'm about to relaunch the poll. Okay, you should see that in front of you. And of course, vote in the chat if you need to, or if you've dialed in, say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay. I'm going to start counting that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I'll share the results. With what's in the chat, we have 14 affirmative, 0 negative, and 5 abstain. So the motion carries. Okay, we have come to the end of our ballot reconciliation votes for today. And I think that means that I need to close out this meeting now. So let me bring this up and so we can announce the results of the vote, I believe. Next up, where are we? How did people vote? Find out. Actually, I think here's one I prepared earlier. All right. It looks like we're going to remain on Australian Eastern Standard Time. I will send out some updated meeting invites for that.
Daniel, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if everyone is able to vote because Zulip's not reachable. I don't know. At least I'm facing issues accessing Zulip.
I don't have a problem with Zulip.
Yeah, me neither. I was unable to get there.
I think HL7's having troubles because I can't get onto Confluence.
Yep, same.
But
I
no,
took the
I'm
old
having
whole internet.
I
I've
can
gone in and
currently
out of
get
it
to
maybe
Zulip.
10 times.
Should we leave the poll open for some defined time and then just act
We
on
can
the
go till
majority?
Tuesday maximum. It has been open already and emailed around for a week.
Was there anyone on the call maybe that wants to add to the vote that aren't already on Zulip?
It does sound like it. All right, we'll leave it open till Tuesday. For those people on the call, until Tuesday, you can vote and then we'll do that one. I won't email around again because we have already, I guess, done the email out to the Patient Summary FHIR IG people. And I'll leave it to Tuesday because Monday is a public holiday. So I'm not actually sure why that's not working for you because it is actually working for me and it's working for Richard. So I don't know if people in Queensland are just, somehow getting access.
Yeah. I didn't want to point out, Danielle, that you voted for both sides in case you took it out of
I sure
option.
did. No, I'm fine with both. So
Yeah.
either option works for me. All right, so I'll leave that open to the end of Tuesday. So if you want to contribute and you can contribute by the end of Tuesday, please do so. And then I'll send out the updated meeting invites based on whatever the majority vote is at the time. Okay, so we don't have an official result. There'll be an action item on me to check that on Tuesday. And then to send out an updated set of meeting invites. Our next meeting is going to be kind of the same. but also the results of the AUPS block vote. So one will be sent out also, I think, probably on Tuesday, that will go through some editorial informative issues will be submitted out to an electronic vote. That will happen via email. It will also be notified on Zulip. And then we will go through the AUPS ballot reconciliation. That's going to include some no known X and no history of X content. We didn't get to start that today, but that will come up as part of our next discussion. There might also be a few other items to include. Yep. Reminder. Okay, fantastic. Is there anything else that people need to go through before we close the meeting? All right, then we are at time. Thank you, everyone. We've got through our ballot items today, and I think that was a really good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.